Mr. Speaker, we can see that today in society, what we think is extremely vital for people, especially in the LGBT community, is the idea of normalization within any countries in status quo. We think that these people need to be need to see their rights being implemented, and in order for equality to happen, they need to do so within their home countries. So, Mr. Speaker, what is the burden coming from side government today, and what we're going to show to you? We're going to show to you why, essentially, we regret the situation that is happening right now. We are not trying to show to you what we're going to implement and whether or not we're going to ban the proposal that's happening. We are simply going to show you that why asylum for these people in the current status quo is not essentially more harms than good in the current. Mr. Speaker, what is the criteria that has to be met in order for asylum that we usually take? We think that asylum we usually implement for people that we see that have lack of basic necessities, Mr. Speaker. In countries such as Syria, where people that don't get water and shelter and basic safety and security, Mr. Speaker, that is when we think that these people are directly harmed, and their livelihood and the idea of them being alive the next morning is harmed, and therefore we think we should offer them asylum. We think unless these LGBT people have the don't have these basic necessities, we don't think we should offer these people the asylum, because these LGBT people are just basically facing oppression. We think they can overcome that. We don't think they are being harmed so bad that they do not have water and food on their tables, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. No, thank you. So what are my 2 points for you today, Mr. Speaker, that I'm going to talk to you about? I'm going to talk to you about how this proposal is of the worst interest of LGBT communities in the home countries themselves. No, thank you. And secondly, I'm going to talk to you about how there's a lack of engagement in the home countries due to the proposal set forth, right? No, thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, interest of the LGBT within any countries in status quo is that normalization, especially we think this is extremely vital, especially in circumstances where there's high amount of oppression. We see that these people have more incentive to bring up the LGBT community within this country. But for that to happen, Mr. Speaker, we believe time needs to occur. We believe that organic change, such as organic change, has to occur within the community, Mr. Speaker, in which they are backed by the society that lives within the community. There's no point there's no point of us trying to normalize LGBT within these home countries when society doesn't accept them, when these people leave for the United States. No, thank you. So and also, Mr. Speaker, we think that they are not alone in this fight to change the societal views within their home countries. No, thank you. We think that these people are backed by other foreign bodies such as the United States. We can see countries where they have high amount of oppression, such as Uganda. We can see that the United States sanctions these countries when they implement such bullshit theories that harms the LGBT community. Therefore, this is a political stand showing that the United States and other countries that are more liberal are supporting these people in their fight to normalize LGBT within these home countries of high repression. We think that they are not alone in their fight to end the war of LGBT. So, no, thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, we think that's a clear sign of these states to pressure the government to change in their political stance and whatnot. But Mr. Speaker, we think that is not enough. We think what needs to happen in order for more conducive environments, we need society to be normalized. We need the change on the ground. We believe that in order for the change on the ground to happen, no, thank you, we need society to deem the people and the LGBT correctly and deem them normal, right, Mr. Speaker? We don't think that once you leave, is that we don't give the opportunity for society to deem you normal. Because what society is going to think is that they're not happy with the situation that they are, and therefore they imply on the rhetoric, if you're not happy, leave the country. We do not want that to happen any longer, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. Moving to my second idea, and what we think is extremely important for today's debate, in why there needs to be engagement within the home country. Before that, anyone?
Okay, recognizing the context of Syria, which is a very conservative society, and mainly face oppression from ISIS and also the oppression, the Sunni.
Mr. Speaker, it's taking too long.
How is it the government there going to give recognition to LGBT?
Mr. Speaker, in cases such as Syria, when at ISIS, you can see that the people are directly harmed by terrorist groups when they are firing bullets at us, and therefore we think these people deserve asylum. I don't really understand what his proposal is, because we think that these LGBT people have more incentives and more basic necessities. They are not as badly oppressed as people in Syria. We think that they can make a change. They're just too timid, and therefore we have to incentivize these people to make the change within society. No, thank you. Also, Mr. Speaker, moving to my second point on why these home countries need to be given the opportunity to engage. Because, right, Mr. Speaker, if we remove all the LGBT people to asylum to the United States, we believe there is no dialogue and no negotiations occurring between the two parties. Because when your entire LGBT community leaves, why does the government see the need to protect the LGBT community as a whole? Because in order for normalization to occur and rights to be protected, Mr. Speaker, dialogues and negotiations need to happen between two parties, Mr. Speaker. When one of those parties in a foreign country, we don't think negotiations will happen, and therefore we don't see any progressive change and any forward movement. No, thank you. Because we can see in clear examples such as the civil rights movement within the United States, where African Americans were constantly constricted to their rights. We think that these people, right, it didn't happen over time. It didn't, no thank you. It happened over centuries, Mr. Speaker. We think that these people took time and took years with the movement because they constantly fought for their rights, constantly stayed within their country. They didn't move out due to the oppression that's happening. We believe they took the initiative to stand for to take the stance and hold their rights as the most important things within their government. Because in order for forward progression to occur, Mr. Speaker, it needs to happen in a conducive environment. And in order for a conducive environment to exist, Mr. Speaker, we believe that there needs to be negotiations and dialogues between major parties. Because the government will once civil rights movement and these LGBT community can start with their movement and start progressing, we think that the government can see that the people are genuinely dissatisfied with the situation that's happening, and therefore we think that the government with the negotiations will change. Because the government do not see the need to change when the LGBT people are leaving. They're just simply going to stick to the rhetoric that if you're not happy again, just leave. Because, Mr. Speaker, what their proposal is stating, which has no clear examples of how their proposal shows productivity in terms of normalization, we think ours has. We think we have brought to you clear examples of such as the civil rights movement and such as other rights and activists within other countries that can happen within these countries where oppression is occurring. So what have I talked to you about, Mr. Speaker? I've talked about how it's the worst interest of LGBT because they don't basically change societal views. Also, Mr. Speaker, we think that the government, in order for them to change, we need dialogues, because government won't simply change when you and your party leave. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we regret the situation that is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and now I'd like to call up the opposition leader to give her speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to government, right, when it comes to being in your own home country, right, we don't necessarily think that just because you choose a sexual orientation, it's something that should be a crime and something that should be prosecuted. And we don't necessarily think that in this motion itself, within your own country, there is no check and balance, and there's no third party who is actually trying to help the rights of these LGBTs, right? But a few, before I move on to my battles, a few characterizations, right? That why do we necessarily need the US, right? We understand that yes, the government side is going to say when the US comes in, then you're not trying to say the role of the government in that hometown is working. But ladies and gentlemen, the fact that the government in its own hometown is not supporting LGBTs, but in fact not only supporting but prosecuting LGBTs, like for example Uganda, how gays are being prosecuted just because they choose to like other men, right? We don't think this stigmatization coming from the government within the society is something that should be supported. But secondly, how is asylum a form of protection, right? Because we don't think that within your own country it's justified for you to prosecute someone because of sexual orientation, especially when that somebody is a normal citizen, right? And we don't necessarily think that without asylum, we don't necessarily think that these parties should be treated as a second level citizen within their own country itself. But ladies and gentlemen, how is this debate really about, right? How are you going to assure that the US can actually do protect and give the right asylum? We're not going to necessarily think that okay, the US sees somebody who's LGBT in their country, they take and put in their country. No, ladies and gentlemen. What really happens is when they see somebody who's an LGBT who does not do any crime but is actually be prosecuted for a crime of choosing sexual orientation in their home ground, we necessarily think this is when asylum takes place, and it's what's very necessary. But ladies and gentlemen, a few rebuttals, primarily from side government today, right? What they say about the necessities and whatnot of these people fighting within their home ground itself. But first things first, ladies and gentlemen, it's not about these LGBTs getting necessities or not, right? It's already one thing when they don't get necessities, but it's another thing that when their sexual orientation is being harmed to, is being the crime that you defeat the purpose of them being an LGBT, right? Yeah. Because ladies and gentlemen, the whole basis when they don't have a third party, when they don't have a check and balance system for them to support them, is what makes it very harmful. But yeah. No, thank you. Another thing is when they said something about negotiations, how it's not how they want a dialogue and whatnot. Here's our response to this, right? How are you going to assure that negotiations really happen? Because if you see right now, negotiations don't happen within its government itself, especially when the government is not supporting. And how are you going to assure that these dialogues will even happen, right? Because they never gave you this justification that the government within itself in its hometown will give protection towards the people. Even if we necessarily think that if these people really want protection, we don't necessarily think that that individual should leave the country itself. We necessarily think that this individual should get protection and asylum from the US, because I think that's when you can get recognition, and that's when oppression will stop, and that's how you're going to achieve equality. No, thank you. But ladies and gentlemen, before with that, I'm going to move on to my first point. What's the dire need of these protections, right? Why do we need asylum in the first place? Why prosecuting? Prosecuting because they're LGBTs is not justifiable. First things first, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the nature of how they're being oppressed, right? They're not being oppressed because they're not getting food and whatnot. They're being oppressed within society because, for example, when the government itself says that because you're gay, I'm going to prosecute you because it's a crime. When you say that within the society itself, they demand these people are bad people. The amount of oppression these people give is not just not only getting food and whatnot. The type of state they are as second-class citizens within that home ground is something that we believe is not something that should be treated. We think that their rights as normal citizens should be uptrade, right? And this is why we really need asylum. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the nature of LGBTs, right? How it's not a crime for them within their own home ground, because we necessarily think that LGBTs actually do pay tax and do normal citizen stuff, right? Because we necessarily think that we shouldn't have a recognition within the government itself stating that sexual orientation is a crime, because we necessarily think that sexual orientation is something that you choose to have, and something that sometimes you don't choose to have because it's something that's within you itself. We think that that type of state shouldn't be a type of crime within the government itself, because it's something that isn't it makes you because it makes you a second-class citizen. We necessarily that their rights of them is not being treated well. But no, thank you. But before that, yes, one.
Ma'am, go past your truisms. We know gays are fine. Now tell us, ma'am, how are you going to correct the situation when you're not engaging with the government in the first place?
Okay, right. Ladies and gentlemen, here's to my second point. Right? Why asylum is okay. How we're not going to affect the sovereignty of the country, right? When you have the US intervening, right? Because necessarily when it comes to one's government recognition, we necessarily that human rights should be a trade. Because even if you claim that the government is going to give the protection, we think that's purely assumptions, because the government is there to never start to support that to begin with, right? Because first things first is when the government does not support it to begin with, then the society will never support it to begin with itself. Because the number of people, because this is why we need the US to come to intervene, right? Because we don't have a check and balance system. We don't have a third party taking care of these LGBTs within its system itself. You're going to accuse saying that there is a backup system within the home ground itself, but we don't necessarily think it's true. Because even if there is a backup system, these backup systems cannot work because it's already because sexual orientation is already a crime in the first place within its country itself. This is why we need a third party, not from its home ground, which is the US, because the US is a role model and actually can help fight for the rights and normal human rights these LGBTs should have. And this is how asylum works, right? Because if you leave simply, you're just going to leave an individual, and other LGBTs won't get that help and whatnot. But when you have asylum, you actually give a recognition saying that, okay, we're trying to prove to you that when you actually take somebody who's an LGBT who's about to be prosecuted, actually saving them, you actually try to prove that LGBTs are okay, they do not do a crime. When that happens, only then within the government itself can have a realization that yes, LGBTs are okay because they are normal people. That type of recognition is what you need to achieve equality. It's not about achieving equality within the government and trying to make a society understand. It's yes, but how are you going to try to achieve understanding within the government in the first place? Because if the government doesn't even understand, and this is how equality comes in within a third party, right? Because we see no organic change within the status quo of you trying to ask the government, because asking the government is already is not working, and negotiations are not working, right, ladies and gentlemen. So this is why we probably need US and how asylum really works and actually does give recognition and actually wanting to achieve equality within LGBTs in the first place. So what have I proved to you in today's debate? I proved to you that when it comes to oppression within a hometown, we don't necessarily think it's fair when the society is oppressing LGBTs because the government gives a stigmatization and saying that these people are doing a crime to begin with. Because they give that stigmatization, this is why we need a third party from another country, which is the US, to actually to neutralize that and to actually have asylum to not only protect these LGBTs, but in fact give recognition for then the other LGBTs in their home ground can be equalized. With that, thank you.
Thank you, opposition leader. Now I'd like to call up the Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Fastest you take it. Good morning, everyone. Madam Chair, all she proved to us today was this, that there is an inherent problem in the home country towards gays and gays are. Now, thank you very much for all the truisms that both sides of the House agree with in the first place. Because let us understand their entire case, Madam Chair. She comes up and tells us there's nothing wrong with gays. Yep, here. There's nothing wrong, and there's an inherent problem within this country. Well, here indeed. But here's the problem, Madam Chair. This debate is really about whether what we're doing by providing asylum is the best way forward. Because both sides of the House put this one burden into question in today's debate. Now, how are we going to correct the situation in the home countries? Our end objective or goal is to change the perception and mindsets within the home country in the first place. Now, they never really told us how these things are going to change, because what they're supporting, Madam Chair, is cowardice. Now, nothing. If there's a problem in your country, run to us at the end of the day. I'll show you how running to us cannot be a sustainable method in solving the situation in the long run, Madam Chair, to begin with. Now, a few rebuttals before moving on to my 2 points in today's debate. Now, I'd like to deal with his POI, ma'am, because that's something I don't want to be bashed around in today's debate any longer, right? Now, there's an inherent difference between asylum seekers from Syria or from a war-torn nation and those LGBT asylum seekers in the first place. Two responses to that. First thing, Madam Chair, is that the people in Syria and these war-torn countries are busy dodging bullets and don't have the time to understand or explore their sexual orientation to begin with. So here's the problem with that, right? Understanding this, Madam Chair, we're going to be providing asylum for them simply because they need the most basic human rights at the end of the day, and that is food, shelter, and safety from bullets, Madam Chair. And understanding that this sort of asylum is very different from the LGBT one is something that we must draw our line towards. Because let us understand the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need, as human beings, or in fact animals to begin with, food, shelter, and safety. And once you've achieved that, can you move higher up the rank? And finally, one of self-actualization. And that's where understanding and exploring your sexual orientation is in, Madam Chair. So this is something of a different scale. We need to provide the most basic forms of human rights to begin with. Moving on to my second rebuttal, Madam Chair. Now, this is dealing with their case. No checks and balances, Madam Chair. I don't understand this. Two reasons why. Number one, there's, again, I must mention this, supporting cowardice. How is this a check and balance to begin with, Madam Chair? Like, you're not really going and saying, well, Uganda, your laws are pretty bad, like, but you know what, do what you want, we'll take the people who are gays. How is this a check and balance, and how does this correct the situation, Madam Chair? You know what, I'm interested in hearing his response. Yes, sir.
In the country who actively stigmatizes gay people, how do you ensure that there will be organic change?
Sit down. I'll get to that, Madam Chair, in my response now. Here's the thing. Equate asylum. You wasted a POI. Equate asylum. And make this assumption again. They equate asylum with check and balance at the end of the day. How is this a check and balance? Because what we understand as a check and balance, Madam Chair, is a power sitting by their sides and saying these laws are bad to begin with. Something that we say is happening already, and it doesn't come about through asylum seekers. Because we've told you, Madam Chair, Uganda has been punished by the West, Madam Chair, when US said we're not going to give you aid. Okay, this has happened, right? Read the news, guys. Tim advised. Read, guys, here's the thing. Asylum aid is already being stopped being given to Uganda. And what happened next? They've already loosened the law against discrimination. So understanding this, right, they're not giving asylum is not the best way forwards. We feel the pressure like not giving aid and having direct negotiation with the countries is the way forward, Madam Chair, not their situation. Moving on to the third rebuttal, right, the whole idea of sovereignty of government, right. UTP knows a lot of big words, Madam Chair, but they don't really understand that, because sovereignty is not invaded by just giving advice to foreign countries or telling them don't do this. Now, sovereignty is only invaded if the territorial integrity of the country is, put aside throughout. And this is a situation like Ukraine, for that matter, Crimean region. So it's rather stupid for them to come up and tell us and use these big words and come up with truisms that we all agree upon. So weak case, DLO, please engage with us. Sit down, I'll take you later, right? So here's the thing, US is not a role model in that sense. The way the US is a role model is to show the world that everyone has human rights that must be respected at the end of the day. We can only do this through direct negotiation with countries, not stealing their people away from them or taking them away, because that doesn't provide an avenue for negotiations. Their end goal and our end goal will not be met under their proposal. Now, under my points, right? First point, Madam Chair, how can change really come about? Let us understand what equality really means, something that they never really wanted to discuss about. Equality can be only achieved if these three criteria are met. Number one, equality before the law. Number two, equal opportunity provided to citizens. And number three, equality in society, right? We already see that the organic change can happen, Madam Chair, because number one, when there are laws oppressing gays, the United States is already there, not providing asylum, but rather directly engaging with them. In the case of Uganda, providing number one, already equality before the law, Madam Chair, something both houses agree is necessary. Number two, equal opportunity, and number three, equality before society. Now, these are two things that they never really wanted to talk about, because this is something that can only change if the LGBT people are there in their home country. Because for equality in society to occur, cultural changes and mindsets within society has to change. And how can your mindset change, Madam Chair, when the people that you're changing your mindset for aren't even in your country? Like they're in a foreign land, like away. This doesn't provide a form of engagement. When the LGBT stay in their country and engage with society around them, telling them that I am normal just like you, that's when equality before society can really happen, Madam Chair. Because under their proposal, well, the best we can achieve is equality before the law, nothing else. We told you that through direct engagement is the best way forward. So, Madam Chair, onto my last point, right, which is more of a question, really. Why do we need to make this choice? Why do we regret the situation? Because let's face this, right? If the United States were an infinite landmass with infinite amount of resources, well, we could take the whole world into our arms, Madam Chair, and we could all live happily together. But here's the problem, Madam Chair. We have scarce resources, and we must understand where to allocate them and efficiently and the best. We understand that there are some people that require resources more than others, Madam Chair, and we feel that to achieve our end goal at the end of the day, by attaining equality within society and the law for gays, that engagement is necessary, Madam Chair. Engagement can only happen if the LGBTs are there in their country, going through the same constant battle that the LGBT community of America had to go through for hundreds of years at the end of the day. And Madam Chair, let me remind you again, they're not alone in this battle, because the international LGBT community is backing them. The United States, through sanctions like the one shown in Uganda, is already there. Madam Chair, if they really want to get back into this debate, move on from your truisms and tell us, give us a point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. I'd like to call on my
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's funny that opening government accuses us of being touristic, but at the same time, they're being very generic in their whole idea of how, you know what, discussions can never happen if you have asylums together as well. We tell you that the idea of asylums is that when discussion doesn't work, when negotiation doesn't work, and you know people are still being oppressed after negotiation. After time and time again, negotiation doesn't work. How do you then balance out this idea that they are still being oppressed? We tell you even further, right? Their whole idea of oppression is already being mischaracterized in this debate. We tell you when we talk about gays being oppressed, it's never necessarily, we don't necessarily think the main idea is that they're not getting water or electricity or welfare. The whole idea of them being oppressed is about them not being identified as first-class citizens, they're being identified as second-class citizens, they're not being given the same. We tell you the idea of how they are being prosecuted for for choosing to be gays to begin with. We tell you these are the things that they mischaracterize as the criteria for having asylum to begin with. What am I going to tell you today? I'm going to tell you how the nature of LGBT movements, how LGBT society would react to this proposal, and how providing asylum is parallel to all these LGBT movements to begin with. Sorry, sir, too early. Now, moving on to my first, but before that, let's rebut a few things. First issue, can organic change work to begin with? This is something that OG tried to picture to you. We tell you that they tell you that, look, discussion can still happen. We tell you time and time again, it's not mutually exclusive under your case, that only without asylums, discussions work, we tell you. We tell you even under our case, right, having asylums makes it a much better push for societies to have discussion to begin with. But if discussion doesn't work, right, we tell you that asylum is a way for the third party to show to the world that, you know what, they are still doing injustice to a part of society that chooses to just self-actualize and not necessarily wanting to be oppressed to begin with. We tell you that they can, and then they try to tell you, sorry sir, they try to tell you that, look, they can always move out of the country. We tell you no, we tell you asylum provides more, we tell you that asylum provides more than just moving out of the country. We tell you that you cannot, the idea of you having asylum is that you have political protection when you move out of the country compared to how you just move out of the country independently, right? We tell you that's why under our circumstances, we provide a political protection that you do not provide under your case. Lastly, this idea of a conducive environment, they talk to you about how you need a conducive environment in order for you to have a discussion. We tell you conducive environment doesn't necessarily exist under your paradigm to begin with. We tell you for a society that stigmatizes LGBT, that the government itself is actively prosecuting LGBT for who they are. We tell you that there's no conducive environment to begin with. We don't think a conducive discussion can never really work. We tell you inherently, your nature of discussion can only work if people are on an equal mindset, but having a part of a society who actively thinks that being gay is wrong, and having that discussion is not conducive to begin with, because that's not going to be a productive discussion. Discussion to begin with. Before that, one point.
Here's the thing, Madam Chair. The US already stops governments from prosecuting. How is society going to change its mindset when the people are far away? And we can't have a discussion when everyone's on an equal ground, Madam Chair. We understand this disparity, and this disparity can only be corrected when you have LGBTs engaging directly.
Look, the difference of degree of credibility coming from society and coming from government is something that you should need to take into account. When government has actively stigmatizes the people for being gays, not having an active role, and having people being stigmatized, if discussion doesn't work, you need to have an active role in terms of going against it. We tell you that public condemnation has been done, sanctions has been done. We tell you we don't see why another step of protection can never be done to begin. We tell you that's why we want a protection for LGBTs to begin with. Sorry sir, the second issue that I want to talk about is this role of asylums to begin with. We tell you that, is it really cowardice to begin with? We don't think it's cowardice. We think that moreover it's a championing of human rights to begin with. We tell you when it comes to how you are being actively searched for, actively exploited for your own choices, we tell you that if you don't have protection, if you don't have a particular party who protects you physically, we don't think that that's actually something cowardice, but rather seeking the legitimate protection even. We tell you that seeking legitimate protection is never cowardice to begin with. We tell you if you cannot work it out within your country, what's your result there? We don't think that's something of a response. We don't see a response coming from that side. Sorry sir. Now moving on to my contributions to this debate. The nature of LGBT movements to begin with, and how having an asylum is parallel to this whole movement of LGBT to begin with. We tell you having an asylum is something that LGBT movements fight for to begin with, because it's something that, you know what, they want to fight for. They know that these people are being oppressed. They know that organic change it doesn't necessarily work, especially in a country who particularly stigmatizes gay movements. We tell you that LGBT movement really wants a particular party to take into account and take liability to these people because these people are being actively stigmatized. We tell you that this, especially when the US are the frontliners of the gay movement, right? We tell you that's more of an incentive for the US to actually play this role as providing asylum or providing protection to the people who are being oppressed from this country, who are tyrannically oppressing these people for being something that they choose for. We tell you, secondly, this whole idea of LGBT society, right? Why did they choose to be gay to begin with? We tell you that when they choose to be gay, we tell you that they choose to self-actualize, but not necessarily they choose to be oppressed to begin with. We tell you there's never a choice for you to be oppressed, rather you choose to be self-expressive to begin with. We tell you if you have that choice to be self-expressive, we don't see why you should be oppressed to begin with, especially when protection don't even exist in their home country. We tell you under our paradigm, we provide this protection. We provide this protection for a party that does not necessarily exist under their paradigm. We tell you under our party, we have this certain net for these LGBT people to come for if negotiation doesn't work, if people still keep on killing people for failed negotiation over and over again. We tell you that in terms of LGBT society, we tell you that in terms of how society functions, right? We want to ensure that at the end of the day, tolerance between LGBT does improve, right? We tell you in terms of how you want to improve the tolerance of people, we don't think only negotiations should be there. We tell you that negotiation can be there, but if negotiation doesn't work, what is your response to it? We tell you that if push comes to shove and people are still being oppressed after negotiation doesn't work, what do you do then? We tell you we have a solution for this. We have a party who is the frontliners of the gay movement, who has credibility to protect the gays to begin with, to protect them at the end of the day. In terms of seeking, is an act of cowardice. In fact, we think that it's a championing of human rights that they so deserve and they so not worthy to be oppressed for. With all that said, I beg to oppose.
I will keep standing for the kind of stereotype that the American must be fat, must be obese, holding a shotgun. I don't want an increase in their army that drops soap and just have fun all the time. The problem is this: we're fine with the US taking asylum. We're not fine with an active involvement when they need to take asylum from people. When you think back, why doesn't the US take any of the Russian asylum during the Olympic when Putin clearly hates gay? Or why didn't they take all the gays within Uganda? It's because there are other methods, there are other avenues to do this. I regret the opposition side today saying that they champion human rights by not fighting for these people's human rights at their own home country, especially when the pride end up here today saying that the government is doing something wrong. But then what are you doing? You're letting this government let loose. You're letting that belligerent state do what they want, but you never condemn them for what they do. The question that they want the negotiation fail. If all of this doesn't go on, what then? What then is sanction? We see it works on Uganda, it works on other places, and it can also work again. When you need to understand today, there's always a lot of freedom fighters, and I'll go on into detail on how fighting for rights is important in their own home country. But then again, you cannot pull these people out because then you don't have that bargaining chip in the first place. Other of my rebuttals will be integrated into my own point, except for one. They want to argue to you today that these governments are keep on exploiting people. There's no kind of support. This is very untrue, especially when you consider that right now in a technological country, there's an international NGO body that always fight for the gay movement. There's always a lot of internet support group that fight for the gay movement and give moral support to these people. They concede to the fact that these people do not seek asylum because they don't have house, they don't have electricity, their life is not endangered at any point in time, they can live their life normally, but they are being bullied to a certain extent by the we're fine with that till out into another country. Before I move on to my point and the rest of their rebuttals, yes.
Okay, basic logic. If I don't have food, I don't have place to stay in Syria. Why can't I go to US and seek for those things?
Okay, first, that's the Ashland standard that's in status quo, and both opening house agreed to that extent that even they said that these people do have those food and shelter, but they are being treated as second-class citizens. By second-class citizen is only better treatment, but they still get it either way. Please don't talk about Syria or a different yardstick. All of us already agree on the yardstick in the first place. Don't change the debate. Thank you. Just a basic warning in advance. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you today, I'm going to tell you about the kind of freedom fighter that already exists in society and how does change actually occur on the ground. You need to look at the fact, people like Nelson Mandela, they don't fight for the kind of things that they fight for. Martin Luther King, even though they live in the kind of white supremacy, they still fight for the blacks' rights. And even Gandhi, when people who are conquering their land, he still fight for independence in a peaceful term. Negotiation can work, but it doesn't mean just because those people of the higher hierarchy or what they want to call first-class citizen conquer your place, doesn't mean you need to get out of your place and find proper shelter. If you get out of your place, you need to understand your stand in there, you're representing your bargaining chip is not there. Comparison of this situation in status quo, those home country will never fight for gay rights. Because why? Normalization happened in the US. Yes, they go to the US. Yes, get better treatment. But initiative to fight for the gay, their place in the first place, gays, and they're gonna apply this kind of law. US will come and intervene. Yes, negotiation happened. Yes, but what is the outcome of that negotiation? Fine, you don't like how we treat them, take them to US in the first place. We don't want them in the first place. How that will keep on happening, the cycle will continue, and this state will never change. You need a representation in that. When there's representation, when that's right, you need to go there. It also applies, US can go intervene, but not just US. Other NGO that fight for LGBT can actively go into that country and fight and represent for these people in the first place. Because now there is a person's right that needs to be protected in that country. That right, that person right, that one representation is important in that country, in that society. As long as that representation is not there, then the government will always believe there is no need to change their law because there is no gay to change for the betterment of that society. It only exists. All of these freedom fighters, most important thing, they need to be there and they need to show that they are being oppressed, that they are suffering. But in the end, they must also show they do not want to seek out violence, that there is a way for them to coexist. These LGBT, by being there as well, can show that they are still part of a human being. They can still work, they can still get a job, and they're just a normal human as giving obese people actually. It doesn't work that way. When you're being bullied, but you can still live your life, you can still self-actualize, then yes, opportunity in the first place. Doesn't mean we will take you and run away. That's not how a government needs to champion a human's right in the first place, and that's how we stand into this society. But other than that, you need to also understand, this is a fight for lifestyle. This is a fight for a human right to do what they want, the kind of social activity that they believe in the first place. These are always are individualistic belief that these people have. A lot of action that's been given out into the society is because of major event that affects a bigger portion of that society as a whole, not an individualistic society. That's why we regret giving individual people ashram and take them because of oppression. Ashram doesn't work that way. Ashram works when there's a big event that occurs and affects a big part of society. Individualistic belief, individualistic lifestyle is something that you need to stand for and something you need to be proud of. When the government is taking that away from you, it shows clearly that these governments are oppressing your right to live the life that you want. Especially agreed by the LO when she said that these people are not doing anything wrong. Sexual orientation is not wrong, but being oppressed, they are being oppressed either way. What is the solution? We give them a place to stay. We're not punishing the government that's actually being bad and oppressing. That's not the way we want to go. We want to stand for those human rights. We want to give a representation, and we want this government to learn a lesson. And how do you do that? We do that by giving them a proper punishment and not taking these people away and losing our bargaining chip to actually fight for their right. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if you listen explicitly to the Prime Minister's speech, he had already set the context that we're debating today, which is POI is very clear in Syria, where the society is seeing the threat from ISIS and also the rebel Sunni. How is it in this situation the government would give recognition to this society? But before that, I want to deal with few issues from the side of the government. Firstly, on the issues of why do these people leave the country in the first place? I've stated very clearly, these people not only condemn of their basic necessity to housing or food, they also face discrimination in terms of getting job opportunity. And this is what causes them to seek asylum in America, for example, because they have no choice. They don't get income to start with in the first place in their country, and this is what forces them to leave the country and seek help from another country. It's a basic logic there, Madam Chair. But the second issue I want to talk about is this. It's also a part of rebuttal. On Mama's sit down. He talked about where Gandhi fighting for independence in India, and they're exactly right. Gandhi is fighting for independence, not fighting for a recognition of sexuality. So there's no correlation there at the first place. So you need to show how is your organic change? Because you keep on telling that, yes, these need to stay back in their country. But our side want to ask this, what is your solution at the end of the day to enable this LGBT community
that this is a worldwide case. It's not because we argued India, we argued Uganda. Now, Martin Luther King, Madam Chair, fought for black rights, not independence, but black rights. A life is something that is inherent. He needs equality, he fought for it. We believe the LGBT community should stay and fight for the rights and engage directly, Madam Chair.
Okay, to be fair, to deal with the Prime Minister's speech, in the go further, even outside